All right, let's see here. I am going to start this. I'm going to record this. I made a quick PowerPoint that I will go over just about what we're doing as far as um, revising the whole assignment. So there's two parts to it. Just very brief, sort of concrete information to help people. Whether this applies to the draft that you submit by tonight, or the one for the final draft. I mean, it's the same, right? So if this is not part of your draft for tonight, then you will want to make sure you have the things for the final draft. But so here, let me show you this. Okay, let me start. All right, so we're revising that. Let's see where we are. Oh, wait, hold on. Oh, okay. All right, so this is the basic structure. I put this up. This is part of a different, one of the other slides that I had. It's just trying to give you a sense of what this needs to be as a regular structure. So you're basically, the very first part of this is you're writing a personal essay. You have an introduction, which is 1 to 2 paragraphs. You have the story, which is 3 to 5 paragraphs. You have a conclusion. And so these are the things you're trying to make sure you have. Again, this is the type of essay where it's about you, right? It's about you and your experience. But because you're trying to do something specific, like talk about this concept of digital literacy narrative, you want to make sure that each of these sections is sort of doing what it needs to do. So you're not just telling a story, right? Just to here's something that happened to me and so on. You're trying to emphasize certain things in this particular story because you're trying to talk about digital literacy narratives. Okay, so here are things to check for you. Like, think about your story, whatever one you're going to use. The first big deal thing is you want to make sure you're focusing on like a single episode, or might be better to say a single specific learning experience. So not like how I learned to use computers, right? That's way too broad. So we're trying to like get it to somewhere more specific about, how I learned to use an Instagram, right? That's a closer thing. So you're trying to pick something specific as opposed to like, I just learned how to use technology. Because when you do that, you're not really saying anything super interesting or important. You're not able to go deep enough, right? So like in my example here, so the time I learned how to shop online and how it changed the way I thought about technology and shopping, right? So I'm going to talk about that. So that's like me. I mean, shopping works, right? I can talk about Amazon. I can talk about whatever, grocery or Instacart, right? So things that I learning how to do it, going through the process of that, explaining the process of that, and then explaining sort of how it changed my thinking. So let me show you what that, or continue with this explanation, which is you need to have a thesis statement for this essay. And for thesis statements for personal essays are strange because you're not really arguing, which is a very obvious type of thesis statement, right? Like marijuana should be legalized throughout the United States. Guns should be banned and made illegal or whatever, right? Those are very clear arguments, thesis statements. But for a personal one, instead, what you're trying to do is communicate some change that you went through, right? It doesn't have to be a big deal thing, but it's basically like, here I am before I learned this thing and what I think about communication or friends or whatever. And then I go through this thing and I learn about Instagram, and then now I have a different perspective on relationships or friends or something like that. So something happens. That's what you're trying to focus on and you're trying to make sure is in part of your essay. So I have, let's see here. Shopping for everything online, from groceries to clothes to computers, changed my expectations of the service industry and made me less patient, which is interesting, sort of. I don't know if that's true or not, but anyway, that's the idea. Like, something has changed about me because of some experience that I went through. All right. So that in the thesis. Wait, did I put it there? Hold on. Oh yeah. So you generally you have this introduction paragraph, usually maybe a longer paragraph, but at the very end of it, you'd want to have a thesis statement, which is something about how your perspective has changed or what you understand after going through this learning that you did not understand before. All right, so the introduction. So like I said, the thesis goes at the very end of the introduction, but here's something that's you want to pay attention to in the introduction. Like you want to make sure that you're starting the story at the right time, right? Because if you think about it, I can tell any story and I can start from like, when I'm 2 years old, even though the story I'm going to talk about happens when I'm 22 or whatever, right? So you can start anytime. So you don't want to start too early. Like you don't want to give sort of a very long background. Now, many of us, when we write, we think, well, we need to have all this background so people understand what we're talking about. But what I'm saying is that one way to improve your writing is that you focus on what you're trying to communicate, and then the background, whatever is necessary, will sort of naturally come out when it's supposed to. So I don't have to set up sort of like my whole childhood about how I never, got to watch TV and my parents were against technology, and then I got older, and then finally I got a computer, and then now I had to learn how to use email, and like basically I should just start it. I needed to learn how to use email, right? That's where my story actually starts, and then I can talk about that particular thing. So try not to, give it too much of a background. Again, though, this is what rough drafts are for, to be honest. Like if you wrote a big long background, that's fine. But now for when you revise going forward, you want to take a look at your introduction. You want to basically start it with whatever your experience is going to be. So I have begin with the circumstances of your first encounter with the type of digital literacy you will be explaining. So whatever you've actually settled on to talk about. So if I'm really going to do shopping, right, like shopping online, I'm going to tell that how I learned how to do that and screwed up and all the stuff. I'm going to start with what got me to do that? Why did I start to do that? And what were the circumstances? Right? Oh, I started during the pandemic because I didn't want to worry. I was worried about going out or whatever. That's it. And then I start to talk about learning how to do it. And then that's what I say for my last. So C is any necessary background will sort of come out. It'll be folded into your digital literacy experience. So, the takeaway is start right before whatever it is you're going to talk about. So if you're going to talk about how you learn what Twitter is and what it does and how to use it, start with what made you go on Twitter the very first time. Or same thing with Instagram, right? Or if you built a website, right? That's another thing I've done in my own life, right? But so I needed a website to do this thing, and here's how that went, right? So you start with whatever your main experience is going to be. All right. So in order to actually show that your perspective has changed, right? Like, oh, okay, now I sort of understand. I think about shopping differently, and I think about the people who shop or people who work in the warehouse, and I have all these other thoughts that I never thought about before because I used to just go and buy stuff at the store. But in order for that to be very clear to a reader, you need to make sure that you establish how you think about whatever it is before your experience, right? Like, so if instead I'm going to talk about how social media, like how I learned to use social media for different things, like communicating with people or promoting my business or whatever, I want to establish how I thought about it before I learned, right? So my example here is I never thought about social media being useful for anything but posting pictures or catching up with the lives of my friends. Okay. So I'm establishing how I see it and how I think about it beforehand. Then I will explain specifically and in detail sort of the process that I go through and how I learn about it and what I do with it and so on. And then I have now changed, and I understand that using like social media is way more than just pictures of family and all that stuff. So make sure that you try somehow you want to establish, where you were at, and then what happened, and then the change. That's the key. All right. So the main part of the narrative part, right? I said 3 to 5 paragraphs. You want each paragraph to focus on something, though. You want it to focus on some aspect of the experience, right? So I might have one paragraph that talks about, how I used to go shopping and physically shopping, and then I'm thinking, well, how would this work online? And then I go online and I'm looking for which stores I can use, and I try to figure out stores that are close to me, and then making an order and who's going to be delivering my order. Like I really want to try to give people a view into my thinking as I'm going through this process. And you want to try to use paragraphs to help you. So you say, one paragraph deals with one aspect of the learning process or of what you learned, right? So then I learned that I could use social media to communicate, and here's what happened. Then I learned that you could use social media to promote your business, and so this is what I tried to do. So you want to make sure that your paragraphs sort of have different aspects of your story and make them each sort of tell a little bit of it. Okay, so that was the narrative part. So the second part of this essay is the analysis part. So the theory goes like this. After you write your narrative, your story, then you are also going to analyze your story. And that's, a 2-page thing. So the other one's 3 to 4 pages. This is like 2 pages. And this is what you basically need to do. There's a definition of digital literacy, right? We've all seen that already. Like I think it's in the folder for week 1 or week 2. But this is it right here, right? So it gives you the rapid development of digital technologies in the digital era presents individuals in the emerging information society with situations that require them to employ a growing assortment of cognitive skills in order to perform and solve problems in digital environments. These skills are often referred to as digital literacy, which is presented as a special kind of mindset that enables users to perform intuitively in digital environments and to easily and effectively access the wide range of knowledge embedded in these environments. Like, okay, yikes. So that's a whole thing. So here's what we need to do for the analysis. The idea is you're trying to match up parts of your story with parts of that definition. So you are looking at the definition, and then you're also looking at your story, and you're trying to pull parts of your story that reflect the definition. So you're trying to use your story basically as an example of the definition. And so your paper is just pointing that out. So you want to look for specific phrases from the definition and then try to find them in your essay. And then that's what you write about. You say, digital literacy says this, and here's an example for my essay that shows this, and then you explain it. Right, so here's my example. So I just pulled this from the definition. And you probably could even do something with this. The rapid development of digital technologies in the digital era presents individuals in the emerging information society with situations that require them to employ, and then I just put, I made in bold, a growing assortment of cognitive skills in order to perform and solve problems in digital environments. So find a moment or two in your narrative where you use a certain type of thinking, which is what cognitive skills means, in order to solve some sort of problem or a challenge in the digital environment. So wanting to communicate with somebody, or wanting to post something online, or wanting to put my website up or whatever, what type of thinking does that require? Like, what you're trying to get into your own head, and you're trying to find in your story a moment where you do that, and then sort of talk, you can present part of the definition, be like, according to the definition, right, this is the thing. We use different thinking skills to solve problems. All right. And so in my situation, I had to use the thinking skills of analyzing something, or I had to use thinking skills of like, how am I going to get this information to a certain person, or how am I going to get this information to, everybody? How can I promote my website? And what do I need to do to think about how to promote my website, and so on. So it's like you're trying to find some example in your own narrative where you use a certain type of thinking, basically, to solve a problem, or overcome a challenge or whatever, or even just successfully do something. So you're trying to point out a different type of thinking, like something that you might not have thought about before. Like, so for my grocery example, like I never really thought about how food is in warehouses and it gets to stores, and then from stores, so I started to think a lot more about like the chain supply, or the supply chain, right? Which is one of the things we now hear about a lot. But anyway, so I started to think about that, and that's a different type of thinking that I've ever done, where I started to understand how things moved around and were delivered and so on. And understanding that, right, then sort of now I order things and now I understand something. So anyway, that's one example. But some type of thinking and you solve a problem in the digital environment, right? So whether the problem's like communicating, promoting, connecting with somebody, right? Like I'm going to connect with some friend I haven't seen for forever. How does this work? And then you go and you learn how Facebook's works and so on. These skills are often referred to as digital literacy, which is presented as a special kind of mindset that enables users to perform intuitively in digital environments. So now, this part of the definition, I'm thinking, okay, so what is a skill that I learned to be intuitive, right? Meaning, like, there's going to be some way in my learning process where I start to just sort of figure out how to do things. My best example of this right now is, like, I tried to play a video game, right? And I don't know how it works, and I've never played a video game before, and it's on PlayStation, and I'm sitting there trying to figure out just how to move, how to like do any of the things, right? And then the more I'm practicing it, the more I'm sort of getting the hang of it, which is what intuition is. I sort of learned how to do this, right? Now I'm like learning, and I still screw up, and I still don't know, but I'm getting better at it because now I learned how something works, and so I use that, and I continue forward screwing up, then I learn how another thing works, and so on. So that's sort of what this idea is. So I say, explain a moment in your narrative when you began to be able to use your intuition to help solve problems or accomplish tasks. So this is basically like, this is the process still of you learning, but really you start to figure out what it is you can do. Oh, one of my other examples was like, this is back in the day now, but when I figured out that I could email myself documents, like that was a huge thing for me, right? Like I was like, this is amazing because now I know where the documents are. Like I don't have to worry about it. I can email it to myself, whatever. So that's like something that I sort of started to figure out, like, oh, now I can use this email thing to do things for myself. It's not just, like communicating or substituting for letters, which is, I'll explain what letters are later, just kidding. But you know what I mean? All right. So anyway, any way you want to break this, you don't have to do it the way I'm saying. All right. You don't have to like break it down in the exact same way that I'm breaking down the definition. But basically what you want to do is figure out, how to take a piece of it or a phrase from it, and then, show something that you did from your own narrative. I try to do the whole definition. So I have to easily and effectively access the wide range of knowledge embedded in these environments. So now I would, if I could, show a moment where I was accessing knowledge, right? So if my story had been about learning to use the library, right? And I figured that out, that I would have access, this whole databases or things like that. If it's still my grocery narrative, I've been able to learn to access like all the product details from all these different products, which I've never would have ever known or cared about because I used to just put them in a cart. But now I'm online, I can like look and see all the things, right? So now I have, I understand much more. My knowledge is, actually greater because I know I'm accessing the shopping thing through the digital world type thing. All right, I think that's the whole of my